Before we shadow kick off this interview with Master Daniel Pesina from Mortal Kombat, I want to say an absolutely enormous thank you to Decky Play-by-Play and the original Razor for supplying the gameplay footage for this particular interview. A huge shout out to the old school Mortal Kombat community still represented right there. Please do like and subscribe for Decky Play-by-Play. All the information is down below in the description.
Flirt FM, Galway's alternative radio station.
You're listening to the Galway Gamer on Flirt FM 101.3. My name is Owen Murphy and I am the Galway Gamer. And joining me on the line is a bit of a video game legend, Mr. Daniel Pesina. Now, you may not recognize the name Daniel Pesina straight off, but you would definitely recognize the characters he played, because this man was not only the original Johnny Cage, but also Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Smoke, and Noob Saibot, and indeed Reptile in the original Mortal Kombat games. Daniel, as a big Mortal Kombat fan, I've got to say it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the line today, sir.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you for having me and taking time to put me on your show.
My pleasure. All my pleasure. Now, let's begin by talking about Scorpion and Sub-Zero. Now, their rivalry is probably the most iconic in Mortal Kombat history. And these two characters have become something of the poster boys of MK, and they have throughout the years. Did you know when you were playing them, when you were doing the moves originally, did you know that these characters that you were playing were indeed rivals and somewhat hated each other?
Yes, actually, the way they came about was originally when John wanted to have ninjas in the game, it was going to be a low-budget game, so I insisted that the ninjas be Lin Kuei as opposed to like the Japanese ninja, just because the Japanese ninja back in the 80s was in every martial art movie or in almost all the movies, and they always dressed the same. Mm-hmm. The Lin Kuei, or the Chinese ninja, legend has it that they dress exactly as how you see Sub-Zero and Scorpion now, except we're all in black. So when we were shooting the ninjas and we were kind of decided that we're running out of time for characters, that we would combine character. Actually, it was myself, my brother Carlos, and John who started filming the character. And then John goofed around and said, "Oh, these guys are brothers," because myself and my brother Carlos, who is Raiden, are very, very close. So as a joke, we would be joking around with each other all the time. He was like, "Oh, these guys are brothers and they're rivals." And then my brother joked and said, "Brothers would never fight." And then John was like, "Oh yeah, well their father taught them both martial arts, but one of them wants to be the leader of the clan more vigorously than the other one. The other one is more humble." So originally, Scorpion and Sub-Zero are brothers, and then Scorpion murders the father who taught them their art, and then Sub-Zero gets angry and kills Scorpion, and that's how Scorpion comes back, dies, and then comes back to life. Mm-hmm. So originally, our story had to do with a joke about my brother and I, which traversed into this big feud of Scorpion and Sub-Zero out of a joke.
Continuing speaking then about the ninjas, when it comes to Scorpion, he's well known for his spear move, but he's also well known for his, as they refer to it, the toasty fatality. Now, during that fatality, he takes off his mask, he's got a skull underneath, and he burns his opponent. Did you have a skull mask while recording that, or was that after effects?
Actually, John, again, we used to goof off so much. So when we were filming that particular fatality, John told me that he wanted Scorpion to breathe fire. Mm-hmm. And then I was acting like a smart aleck, and I was like, "I can't breathe fire because I will light my mask on fire if I breathe fire," kind of just goofing around. And so John was like, "Oh, take off your mask and breathe fire." And then Richard DeVizio actually was like, "Oh, if he took off his mask, it'd be cool if he was actually a skull." like, because he's dead. Why wouldn't he be a skull? And so when he takes off his mask, all of a sudden he's a scary skull, and then he breathes fire. And so that's how that particular idea came into form.
And then was it a skull mask that you were wearing while recording the footage?
No, actually it was like a 12-inch. John had a 12-inch skeleton that he used for modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so he put the head of that model, which was the skull, on a pencil, and then he filmed it on different angles. So, and then he cut that out of the film because at the time there was no Photoshop. So you would have to physically take a little tool, and it would take for that skull, it probably took 20, 30 minutes to cut that little skull out and then place it on the top of my head.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, John Tobias is really he is the creating force behind Mortal Kombat. It was all his original idea. I helped him sell the idea, pitch the idea to Ed, and Ed didn't like the idea and scrapped it for a while, and then kind of Rich bugged John to bring the idea back into a small project. So then John asked Ed if he could do a small project with it, and I was like, sure, if it's a small project, sure, you guys can start it. So we just started this game, and it went crazy. People really loved it.
That's cool. That's cool. I'll be honest. From the outside looking in, I always thought Ed Boon would have been the driving force.
No, Ed was actually he was our boss,
mm-hmm.
the boss of the project. And so, it's just like in any other life, anything in life, any job in life, your boss gets full credit for whatever you do, even though he doesn't really have hands on it. And eventually he did warm up and give ideas once we were already on our fourth character. When we were filming the fourth character, Ed asked if he could help us out and create ideas. So we welcomed him for his creativity to actually kind of help us create some movement.
And did you get involved in a lot of the creative side then? Did you get to, say, choose any of the characters' moves, choose the outfits? You said that you mentioned Lin Kuei earlier on. Did you have a lot of creative control?
As far as all the movements in Mortal Kombat, Johnny Cage did them first. When John Tobias and I filmed, we filmed for over 3 days, 8 hours a day, filming a bunch of martial art moves. And so we were like, let's try this and that. So we tried almost every move. Even today, you see some of the ideas out of Mortal Kombat 9 and 10. Those we thought of during number 1. So, but we didn't have the technology to do that stuff because we were John, myself, Richard, and Carlos, along with Tony Marquez, who's Kung Lao, Ho Sung Pak, who is Liu Kang. We all played Dungeons and Dragons together when we were kids. So we knew each other before Mortal Kombat, and we're geeks. We were geeks. We were into anime. I did martial arts, but I would play Dungeons and Dragons and go see anime movies with them. And John, my brother Carlos, and the guy who helped draw the first comic book and ink it, Andy Kadelka, they would sit around and draw together at Andy's house for hours. And then eventually John got a job with Midway, and that's how I got introduced. How I got introduced to Midway and Ed was because he called me up and he was like, "Oh, I need help. I want to do a fighting game." And then I was just like, "Okay, I can help you with that." He's like, "Well, it's going to be really low budget, but I need to film you, and you do every martial art move imaginable." So we spent 3 days of filming, and then John took that footage and studied it with Ed. This is after the fact when he gave okay to go ahead with a small project, and they made tweaks to the move to make sure that it would fit into a fighting system, into the they call them hitbox. Mm-hmm. So that way, when a certain movement would go into the box, you'd get appropriate response. But as far as falling and do that, that's all kind of all the physical creation of Mortal Kombat is my idea. Those are my contribution to the game.
That's fantastic. That's very, very cool. So, as
Yeah.
not only a martial artist then, but a self-professed geek as well, you must have been just thrilled to see the absolute phenomenon that Mortal Kombat became at launch in the arcades.
You know what? Yeah, it was cool, but as far as like myself, my brother and Rich, we always knew it was going to be a great game. We just didn't think it was going to be popular because they signed us up to make 200 cabinets. They didn't, so we only thought there was going to be 200 cabinets, but we wanted to make it the best, like, fighting game and have part of our childhood and part of our geekiness in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of the special moves, like you mentioned, the Scorpion's rope dart.
Mm-hmm.
What happens was that was one of the first moves that Ed contributed, wanted to have Scorpion hold the lasso like a cowboy over his head and throw it around the opponent and pull him over. And I told Ed that I didn't want to be Wonder Woman, but there was a weapon in Chinese martial arts called a rope dart, which is used to pull horsemen off their horses, kind of an anti-cavalry weapon. So I showed them how the movements to that weapon, and then John was like, we're going to use that idea instead. I think that's a better idea. So when I did the movement for that weapon, as I was fake pulling somebody over, Richard DeVizio yelled out, "Get over here," in a Kano voice, and that stayed in the game. Now, whenever you hear Scorpion say "Get over here," actually that was Kano in the background with the idea to say "Get over here," and it stayed in the game.
That's amazing, and it has become the iconic Mortal Kombat move throughout the year. That's the one that pretty much everybody refers to when they refer to MK. It all comes back to not only just Scorpion, but Scorpion Spear, Scorpion Dart Rope.
Yeah, So as I said, a lot of people when they're watching the game can actually see where we borrowed ideas. You know, Rich pulling the heart out was like Indiana Jones, a tribute to Indiana Jones, even though Kano wanted to eat the heart. So we filmed Kano eating the heart, and John was like, "Oh no, we can't do that. We can't be like a cannibal in a video game." But I have footage of Rich eating the heart after he pulls it out of somebody, and then John was like, "Just hold it up," and then I chimed out, "Hey, it would be cool if it was still beating, like in like in the movie." And they were like, "Oh yeah, let's do that. We can do that." So, different things came from different parts of our geekiness.
That's really cool. That's fantastic. I didn't know that there was footage of Kano eating the heart. That's phenomenal. Moving back to Scorpion, though, while we're still talking about the original ideas for the characters. Now, Scorpion he's definitely a fan favorite, but his story has him as kind of an evil spirit. He's looking for vengeance. But in order to extract this vengeance, then he's got to become a killer himself. So, in your eyes, does that make Scorpion a hero or a villain?
When I was filming Scorpion, helping create Scorpion, he was always the villain. Because, again, he killed his father. For us, when we were creating it, we kept with that line where he was like, "Oh, he's killed his father." Who in their right mind does that? Mm-hmm. So he can seize control of the clan. And Sub-Zero has always been, in my eyes, even today, even though the story changes. And I know they have to do that to keep the franchise going and to keep interest going. And the story always changes. That's really cool. But in my view, Sub-Zero will always be the hero, and Scorpion will always be the villain.
And speaking of the newer games then and pushing the franchise forward, have you followed this franchise since you left it?
A little bit. My brother still works for NetherRealm, Warner Brothers. So, once in a while I help him out with moves. Some of my students do the motion capture for it. So I kind of follow it a little bit. But again, I think it's because once John left, I really didn't pay that much attention to it because, John being the creator and Ed being the boss of Mortal Kombat, those are kind of two different things. And I think when John left, it kind of, now it's kind of gone a little more sideways, or a little, it's not how I imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else is contributing to it, and the creator is gone. So it's kind of, for me, it's kind of hokey.
Okay. Well, speaking of where it's at now and those changes, we look at one of your original characters, Johnny Cage, he's always been a show-off. He always kind of goofs around a little bit. But now he does all that, but he's also kind of a caring father. Himself and Sonya Blade have a child named Cassie Cage. I know she's not a child per se, she's one of the fighters within the game, but Cage is portrayed as kind of his egotistical self, but also a caring father figure. Did you ever imagine him going in that direction?
Actually, when we were first filming Johnny Cage, he was a very kind of serious character. A lot of people think that we modeled him off of Jean-Claude Van Damme, which is not true. We modeled him off, Johnny Cage's original idea is to model him off of Daniel Rad in Iron Fist. So naturally, I didn't have an Iron Fist costume. I didn't own an Iron Fist costume at the time we were shooting, and most of the costumes come from our own wardrobe.
Oh,
so
really?
John was just like, John was just like, just wear some biker shorts, and we'll put a sash on you. So our original idea was for him to be Daniel Rad in Iron Fist, not Jean-Claude Van Damme. That idea, Jean-Claude Van Damme, came later when Jean-Claude Van Damme said no to Ed's idea of a fighting game, because which is completely different than Mortal Kombat. After Ed heard our ideas, he was like, "Oh, the idea of a fighting game is good," but at the time, Midway was doing video games with stars. They were doing a video game with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator game, and they were doing video game Revolution X with who was it? Aerosmith.
Yeah.
So they were bringing in stars to do video games, and so I thought that, from what I understood and what Ed said was, he thought it would be better to have a mainstream fighting game as opposed to this unique fantasy fighting game. So then when Jean-Claude said no to that idea, that was scrapped. We kind of goofed around and said, well, we're going to poke a little fun at Jean-Claude Van Damme, have him do a couple of moves by Jean-Claude Van Damme, but really he is Daniel Rad.
Cool. Okay. So he's an entirely different character from the one we know now.
Yeah, I think they changed it when we had and again, it might be a question you ask later. We had a disagreement. Like me and most of the actors had a different disagreement with Midway. We signed on to do 200 games. Once it exploded, the company promised us bonuses, and then later on they reneged. They didn't give us any bonuses. They wanted to keep all the money, and because it wasn't actual, because our contract was so loose. My contract's like 2 paragraphs long, and it states like arcade video game, so it never intended to go home or anything like that. And so once Midway kept that money, they kind of wanted to get rid of some of the actors, I guess, especially me, since I was at the helm of, I picked out all the actors from the first 2 games, are like my friends or people that I knew before filming the game. So I got to decide who was in the game, and then I did the moves and stuff like that. And I think that they didn't like the fact that I was outspoken. I was like, "Hey, where's our money?" You said 200 games, and we did. And 2, you promised us stuff. Sure, it's not in writing, but if you promise it, and you should come through with it. But in the end, we didn't receive anything, and it's a lesson you learn in life.
And since you didn't return then from Mortal Kombat 3, one of your characters did, which was Sub-Zero. How did it feel then seeing somebody else play that part?
It's good. It's good because, what did they say? Imitation is the best form of flattery. So even though, we have, you have, actors in the movies, they're acting like us. They're acting like, they're paid to act like me, when they're doing Scorpion or Sub-Zero or Johnny Cage, and two, like my brother is really, I feel proud of my brother because he has, Christopher Lambert is acting like my brother in Raiden in Mortal Kombat. So anytime I see an actor or I see the character, it's nice. It's good because they're, it's something that I put my personality into and I created, helped create, and now people it's still going on. It's very flattering. It's cool.
That's awesome. That's very, very cool. And speaking of those characters, then you were, wow, quite a list. You had Johnny Cage and pretty much all of the ninjas, including the secret ninjas like Smoke and Noob Saibot. If you were to choose one of the characters that you played, who would have been your fighter of choice?
I always liked Johnny Cage just because he personally looks like me, and two, he's the first character. He's the father of all the MK characters, just because he was the first one we filmed. But when I play, I don't play Mortal Kombat well, but when I play, I always play as Raiden because I like the character. Originally I wanted to be Raiden, but my brother got to be Raiden, and I was chosen to be Stryker. And then when the Van Damme thing fell through, they told me that I could be the Daniel Rad character, which was the second character that I really wanted to be.
So you say you were chosen to be Stryker. Stryker didn't turn up until Mortal Kombat 3. Was he initially going to be in the original game?
Yes, we had most of the characters from 1 and 2, and some of the ones, like Stryker, were in our original for number 1. We just ran out of time. Like we had plans to use Jackson number 1, which is modeled after Power Man or Luke Cage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we got the idea for him. Liu Kang is actually modeled after Bruce Lee for the first one, but Shang-Chi from Deadly Hands of Kung Fu comic book for the second one. If you look at the way he's dressed, it's exactly like Shang-Chi, Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. So Sonya is also in Deadly Hands of Kung Fu as a character. I forget her name, but those comic books inspired us to do Mortal Kombat. And it's pretty funny because those are Marvel comics. So Marvel comics inspired to do characters that are now owned by DC or Warner Brothers.
That's very, very cool. I wasn't aware that Stryker was going to be one of the original cast. Now, when he did come in Mortal Kombat 3, though, he wasn't a fan favorite. In fact, he was quite the opposite. Do you reckon he would have been a fan favorite if he was part of the original generation?
I think that's why we didn't film Stryker in the original generation, because I never thought that type of character would fit into... when we were making Mortal Kombat, we were trying to make it as, even though it was a fantasy game, as real as possible. Mm-hmm. Meaning a good example is when Johnny Cage uses his projectile, his fireball, his thing. If you look at the character, I took movements from, there's a guy in Big Trouble in Little China called Egg Chen. He's a wizard, and he has a 9-demon bag that he carries like on his waist. So he pulls magic out of the bag. It's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons. He pulls magic out of the bag and throw it. So when Johnny Cage does his move, he pulls his own magic. That's why he reaches behind him first. He pulls his magic out of his bag and throws him. So we were trying to like do something a little more realistic, even though it's fantasy. We wanted to make it like, it's kind of would make sense that, you can't just do magic without having, saying chants or doing these things. So we just tried to keep it real. So as far as Stryker, I didn't think he would be a strong character because all the other people in Mortal Kombat have been training their whole lives to fight, and here you have a cop who usually only has like a less than a year training is going to match up against these guys. I didn't think it was a good idea. I was like, there's no way. He would just die right away. So we never really shot him.
I think the MK fans pretty much get behind you on that one, Daniel, because nobody really likes Stryker, unfortunately. He's appeared in maybe 3 games at this stage, and he always gets the same reaction, unfortunately. Poor old Stryker. Poor old Stryker. Moving along, you did say that you wanted to make it realistic. Now, the old advertisements used to boast that it was so real it hurt, which was a very, very clever tagline. But the flip side to this realism was the controversy that went with Mortal Kombat and went with the Mortal Kombat levels of violence. As you mentioned, Kano pulling their hearts, you had Johnny Cage knocking off heads, Sub-Zero pulling off spines. The list went on. There was a lot in there that the media grabbed hold of and kind of used as a battering ram, in my personal opinion. Now, I was wondering, do you personally believe that there is any correlation then between people playing as these characters with that on-screen violence and actual real-life violence? I know it's coming back around now again. I remember it was big in the 1990s, that kind of controversy. Seems to be coming back around again at the moment with President Trump getting involved as well with video game violence and whether or not it affects the players. What's your view on that?
Oh, and it's a lot deeper than that. For me, we had one for Mortal Kombat. We were only going to make 200 arcade games. So the arcade has a different type of person coming into the arcade. They're usually in their teens or adults going to arcades.
Mm-hmm.
So again, with the blood, originally we were going to have the characters battle worn, meaning over the time they would have bruises and cuts on their face as the match progressed until the final. Until you had the final beatdown or the final fatality. So that kind of that technology we were not able to do. So
it did actually come in on PlayStation 2, that same idea later on, which was quite cool. It's nice to know that was there from the beginning too. But sorry, do continue.
Yes. Yeah, no problem. Right. That's why I said a lot of ideas that we had for number 1 came out later on. So the blood was over the top. But for me, my mom and dad taught me not to hit my brothers, even though I was studying martial arts since I was 10 years old. And I trained my brother, and I started him martial arts when he was 4 or 5 years old. So we knew not to hurt each other or hurt our friends because our parents would make sure that we were reprimanded in whatever way they felt necessary to do that. So when I grew up, I think the culture is different. I think back then, when I grew up, my mom would worked part-time. So a lot of times she would be around for us to make sure that we grew up in a socially proper way. We knew not to hit anybody. We knew don't swear, don't get caught swearing, don't get caught hitting anybody if you're going to do that stuff because you're going to get in trouble. But I think now with, just an average parent, 2 average parents can't make enough money to make ends meet. Capitalism has gone crazy. A lot of times the parents have to take side jobs and work, over, 60 hours. So they're not in their lives as much as I think what is expected to be taught to a child socially. And is it the parents' fault? No, they have to make money to feed the family. Is it society's fault? It is society's fault, and the fact that we have let capitalism go crazy, and everything needs to be in balance. There's nothing wrong with capitalism as long as you have a balance. Even in the old days, people knew, guess what? You don't overcharge for something because in the old days, the church would get after you. You can't charge that guy. That's dishonest to charge that guy. They would get on your butt and be like, no, you can't overcharge. But now it seems like, with they don't even have to come up with a new product. They just put a new package on it and charge you more. So, with that being said, I think that, one, the parents are missing out on a child's life, not because of they want to, it's just because of necessity. So society has changed differently So I think we should look at it differently. But no, I don't think that the average kid or even the average teen is going to take a video game, think it's real, and apply it to and hurt another person. There's something mentally wrong with the person, whatever, however it came about, whether it's through abuse or whether it's because of neglect. I think we're looking at it and trying to, politicians try to make things simple so that way they don't have to do their job and really solve the problem. But that's my opinion, and that's just how I view it, when I'm seeing out there, because I teach martial arts for a living, and I don't think any of my students go around fooling people. At least, I hope they don't. And their parents usually say, like, no, he's really good, he's kind of patient. So martial arts have made him more patient. He has, like, a confidence knowing that he can handle himself, so people don't pick on him so much. So, again, I think it's a lot deeper problem, and if there's somebody to blame, it is the politicians. It's their job to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen. So instead of whining or complaining, they should be solving the problem. They should be solving the problem, but most of them are not smart enough to solve the problem. Most of them are con artists. There's my 2 cents.
I don't think I'll disagree with that. Thank you very, very much, Daniel. And just to finish up then, on a lighter note, do you still have the Mortal Kombat costumes?
Actually, that's kind of like I have Johnny Cage's shoes. The shoes I wore the first day of filming all the way to the end. I have that, and I have Scorpion's mask. I know Rich has some of Kano's costume. Philip has most of his because he owned it, and Liz has some of hers. Who's Sonia? She has some of hers because again she owned it. Mm-hmm. So, but when and here's the sad part: when Midway sold the rights to Warner Brothers, they threw all those costumes that they had in a dumpster and threw them away.
Oh man, that's heartbreaking. That is straight up heartbreaking.
Yeah, because again, I think they didn't. John was gone by then, the creator, and I think it didn't really matter to them that it was history. It was just like, oh, this stuff is old, just throw it out. Who would, they only cared about the money. They didn't care about like creating it or doing that type of thing.
Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you right here, and I've got to say thanks once again for coming on the Galway Gamer and giving us your time. It's been excellent to have a chat with the real-life Johnny Cage.
Thank you, Owen, and thanks to all the listeners of the Galway Gamer, and get over here and tune in.
101.3 Flirt FM.